Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Padres podcast. It is a great podcast, I think. Sometimes it's even better than great. And today is one of those days because I am being joined by, here we go, the co-founder of JustBaseball.com, one of the co-hosts of the Just Baseball Show, Locked On MLB. Hold on, former Locked On MLB Prospects
Ooh.
host. There we go. I got it right. There we go. I got it right there. And then also doing a whole bunch of other things, including trying to rescue the stranded JustBaseball.com Twitter account. It is Aram Leighton, frequent guest of the pod. Sir, how are you doing?
I'm good, man. I'm good. You're starting to nail down that intro, I think. We can weed it down a little bit. We could boil it down to just a couple of things. But no, it's been too long. Good to be back on, man. And I'm excited to talk some Padres prospects.
Yeah, no, it just feels like it's become this like running bit to just say all the 87 million baseball things, at this point. But no, yeah, for sure. Everybody, you might be familiar with Just Baseball. It's a great website. I write there as well, just as disclosure. And Arm is okay. And Arm is look, it's been busy times for me, but stay tuned. I'm going to be writing some stuff over there. Some Javier Reyes as always. And thank you for making Locked On Padres your first listen, available wherever you get your podcasts, including on YouTube. If you want to see what fit Arm is rocking, go check that out. If you want to see what my ugly butt is wearing, go check that out too. The reason Arm is on today's podcast, though, most importantly, is because of his prospect knowledge. Anyone familiar with Arm, that's probably the first thing that comes to mind, other than sad tweets about the Marlins. It's probably prospects and stuff, because he's got a good eye for this stuff. And what I wanted to ask you about today is what we're going to be focusing on is kind of the remains, like he who remains of the Padres system, because if people haven't heard, Juan Soto is now a Padre. As a result, you kind of gave up every single major team had, more or less. And I wanted to talk about that. But before we talk about some of the guys that are left over, just what was your kind of thought on Juan Soto trade? What was your reaction to the amount of prospects? Have you ever seen that many amount of high level, by what I've heard, prospects being dealt in a trade? Like, what was it like?
I mean, it was pretty fun, right? I was so excited because this is like my Super Bowl, man. Whenever you get a trade like that, I mean, it was so much fun to write up because we're talking about some unbelievably talented prospects here that were sent out. It was way too early where people are like, oh no, oh no, oh no, this trade's a disaster, blah, 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 blah. Look what the Padres did in the playoffs, right? So, and it's only going to get better. I think this team, we finally get to see it next year with Tatis along with the rest of the group. And now I made my case on the Just Baseball show about why the Padres are heading in a great direction. You got to give to get. And to get a generational talent, you got to give up a lot of players here. And look, it was a lot. It was absolutely a lot, but it wasn't one of those situations where I thought, whoa, they gave up that much. It was like, oh, that sounds about right. And it was almost exactly what I thought it would be. The one sticking point, and it seemed like this ended up actually being a sticking point, according to John Heyman, was James Wood. And I would have done anything I could after giving up Abrams, Hassel, and Gore to hang on to James Wood. But at the end of the day, are you going to let a guy that hasn't played above A ball stop you from picking up a potential Hall of Famer here with years of control? Of course, the answer is no. So, it was one of those deals that if you want to go get somebody that's almost never available, you see a player like this available, since Miguel Cabrera is probably the last time we've seen an offensive player with this much control and ability and youth available. You got to give to get. Look how the Miggy trade worked out for the Marlins. I mean, you never know what's going to happen here. And I'll be honest, man, I love these prospects, a lot of them, but there's questions around each of them, right? You could look at Robert Hassel, who now got hurt again. Didn't have a great year overall. There's some questions there, even though I really like him as a prospect. CJ Abrams, I love as a prospect, but still trying to find his feet under him. Mackenzie Gore, we know the roller coaster that's been, even though he's heading in the right direction, kind of ended with a little bit more of that question mark. So, and James Wood is obviously very far off. So there's still a lot to be solved on that prospect return. And with Juan Soto, you know what you got.
Yeah, and it's like, I know a lot of people were saying, it's the Padres fleeced or whatever for Soto. My thing is, if you know you're trading a guy, if that's like you're like, all right, we're trading Juan Soto, then my reaction to the trade was like, Well, obviously, I was very clear. I was texting
Yeah.
you and many others, just kind of not really knowing how to react because, like you said, there's really never been a talent available like this before. But I think you bring up the Marlins, which is a great point. Not to root against the Nationals, although I kind of do because of what they did with Scherzer and Trey Turner to the Dodgers. Um, that's kind of the blueprint for how everybody should remember how star trades just it's very rare. It feels like that you get this full package back that is equivalent to what you gave up. It's just so
Mhm.
rare. The Nationals did it because they genuinely were atrocious,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
Corbin, Strasburg, those guys are just big albatrosses, and one of them might not even pitch again. So I get why they did it. I really do, and I think that if you had to make the deal, you took a bunch of prospects that at least you got some good guys. You would have liked to get like I don't know, just someone who's major like a Cronenworth. That not that he was ever going to be available. You'd like to get a starting caliber player that is already good, but I think that they made out pretty well, all things considered.
Absolutely. And I mean, and they had to take that chance, right? And,
Mm-hmm.
I argued the side for the Padres, argue the side for the Nationals here. They legitimately have a horrible farm system and limited big league pieces that you could say are part of the future. So you got to roll the dice. And the other piece that they got, Harlan Susana, that's someone that the Padres wouldn't have seen in the big leagues for 4 years, right? Big
Mm-hmm.
right hander who can run it up to 102. He could be an ace. He could
Yeah.
also never make it to the big leagues. And, I don't think the Padres were interested in finding that out in 5 years. AJ
Mm.
Preller's never interested in waiting 5 years. So,
No,
you
he's
know,
not.
it, it makes sense. And here's the thing, though, is the Padres have proven that they can replenish. I mean, that's the
Mhm.
one thing. Every time Preller trades, they seem to do a good job drafting. And we're going to talk about Jackson Merrill, who I'm going to use as another example of someone that they identified. Not very many people, were as high on him. He was an
Mhm.
underslot pick when they got him.
Yep.
And look at what he's turned into. If you did a redraft, he wouldn't fall out of the top 20 picks. So, that's the thing with the Padres is if you have the confidence that you can reload, you do it. For the Nationals, they were so doomed that this gives them 5 potential pieces here that, help them in the short term and in the long term. It was a perfect match for both sides. And, ultimately the Padres were the one team that was willing to go over the top on the package. And I don't think that surprises any of us.
No, not at all. And look, for the Padres, I know that he had some ups and downs. Soto did, but he was a lot streakier in his short stint with the Padres than I think we're accustomed to. He starts off, gets a walk in like each like 3 walks in the first 4 games. Then all of a sudden he's atrocious. And I made the joke about Josh Bell turning into Eric Hosmer and all that stuff. Like
Yeah.
it happens, but then at the end of the season he caught on fire. So maybe it'll be more consistent next year. But I agree. I think that also a big thing with the Nationals is I just mentioned before that there's not any like solidified starter. Mackenzie Gore and Abrams have debuted at the major league level. Don't get me wrong, Abrams struggled a lot, but you saw defense and even a modicum of power. And then with Gore, I mean, I still remember. Remember, Arm? Do you remember what it was? It was Rookie of the Year was going to be Gore. Joe Musgrove was going to win the Cy Young, and then Manny Machado was going to win the MVP. I'm glad that one of those 3 things is going to come true, but it's just a reflection again on how quickly things can change, man.
Absolutely.
But before we get into Mr. Jackson Merrill, and I have a lot of questions because I still remember my reaction as to when this pick was made. I just didn't quite get it. Before we get into that, I want to talk to you guys about something very important. Perhaps there is what's the dude's name from Philadelphia? Is Dave Zambrowski. What if he's trying to steal all of your players from you? He takes Brandon Marsh. He takes Noah Syndergaard. He's a big guy who always goes for all these big fish, right? Same thing with AJ Preller. What if you want to be safe, my friends? All right. If you want to be safe in real life, though, all right. First of all, if you want to be safe in baseball, just try not trading with those guys. For some reason, it always turns out well for them, to be honest with you. But when it comes to keeping yourself safe at home, this is my worst transition yet. I'm not going to lie. If you've thought about securing your home with home security, but have been putting it off, you'll want to listen up right now. Lockdown Padres listeners can order the number 1 rated Simply Safe home security system for 50% off. This is their biggest offer of the year. And I mean, 50% off, it better be. And here's why I love it. Bottom line is, I just like the feeling of security, this peace of mind of my home. as a child, a young lad, I used to freak out and say that there were robbers on the roof. This is mostly to do with the fact that I watched the movie Signs, and there was a scary scene in that movie that probably scarred me. Shout out to my mom letting me watch that. But nonetheless, having security makes you feel safe. And what I love about Simply Safe as well, even when you're not home, they've got professional people on the monitors, keeping you updated and sending you stuff if a burglary or any type of thing happens, even when you're not home, and to contact the local authorities. Simply Safe was named the best home security system of 2022 by US News and World Report, a third year in a row. Check that out. It's pretty sick. And now, guys, here's the fun part. Don't miss your chance to save big on the only security system I recommend. 50% off any new Simply Safe system at simplysafe.com/lockedonmlb. This is their biggest discount of the year. Again, so don't wait. That's simplysafe.com/lockedonmlb. There's no safe like Simply Safe. Again, remind everyone, thank you for making it the first listen. Locked On Padres, your first listen every day, free and available on all platforms. The magnificent, the master of finesse, the prospect provocateur, Mr. Aram Leighton is joining me on today's show. We got to talk about Jackson Merrill, who is the main part left over in the trade. We could also talk about Luis Campusano later. I think he's another one that was left over who I don't even know where to. That's a whole thing. We've texted at least. Honestly, it's probably the thing you and I have talked about the most is Luis Campusano.
It's funny, man. You and I have been friends for like several years now, and Luis Campusano, I think, is still in the same position he has always been as a prospect in AAA. When is he going to get a chance? Like, I've known you for years now, and that's been the case.
It's just like, hey, man, I really like this catching prospect.
Yeah,
I think he's
if
really
he gets a shot.
And now it's like, hey, man, I really like this catching prospect.
Yeah.
It's like the same thing. But Jackson Merrill. Now, one of the things as someone who doesn't know much about prospects is that I have trouble understanding the draft from a variety of aspects. And one of them was like, Merrill was this guy who, granted, this wasn't, this is still draft stuff and these things can change so quickly. But I remember people saying this is a guy who should be going later. And then the Padres kind of went after him, and it was a shortstop prospect. And that was confusing because from my perspective, it was like, well, you also have Abrams, you know what I'm saying? And now this is the thing. Maybe this is the thing in baseball is that it's different. This isn't like in the NBA that if you have Chris Paul and then you have the first overall pick and you take a point guard, everyone's like, what are you doing? Right.
Yeah.
Same thing goes for football with quarterbacks. You're a quarterback in Miami. You don't want to draft another quarterback because it doesn't make sense. He's killing it with his super wide open receivers that I'm jealous of, but
not responding
with Jackson Merrill. Man, I mean, just go ahead. Like, tell me about this guy because, like you said about the Padres growing talent, kind of not out of nowhere, but they reload that I think people expect. So tell us about how Jackson Merrill has been doing, why he's caught your eye.
Yeah, so you set the stage really well because you have to approach, I think, teams, especially really good drafting teams, approach to the draft differently because in baseball you have that set pool, right? So you're looking not only at the first round, you're looking at multiple rounds and seeing how you can allocate that money and how you can maximize your upside based on that, X amount of bonus pool money. And in this instance, there were two prospects that I think the Padres really liked. There were several, but focusing on two to hammer this point home that they really liked. And it was James Wood, it was Jackson Merrill. They figured, hey, it's going to be hard to sign James Wood. He's wants to go to college. It's going to take a lot of money. We're going to have to give him more than the slot value. And then they saw somebody like Jackson Merrill, who was probably in between their two picks in the first and second round of where he was going to get drafted. So they take him a little earlier and they sign him below the slot value. 27th overall, they sign him for $1.8 million. That's well under the slot value. They allocate that money towards James Wood. Specifically focusing on Merrill here, I think they saw an opportunity. You talk about drafting by position. You throw that out the window in MLB draft because it takes so long. So many things can change by the time these guys get to the big leagues. You'll get each pick on how you can maximize value. And I think they looked at Jackson Merrill and said, we see where this guy's headed. And if we think we see something that other teams don't, we need to take advantage of that. Jackson Merrill was a bat first guy. I didn't love the pick when it happened either because I didn't see the direction he was heading in. I haven't followed him for months and watched him play. He hit a growth spurt. He also hit the weight room really hard. I talked to him out in the Arizona Fall League about this, and his focus was, hey, I threw up some weight now. He's 6'3". Let me take advantage of that and add muscle to my frame. On top of that, he didn't lose any speed. If anything, he got faster. So he was able to just really maximize that growth spurt. That was something that the Padres were aware of. Said this kid always could hit. Now he's added physicality. Now he's more explosive. What's he going to look like? And I think we're starting to find out. So kudos to the Padres. They did their scouting. They found a late, bloomer that they were able to buy low on. And again, if you did a redraft, there's no way he's there at 27 with how talented he is. And man, was I really impressed with not only what he could do on the field, what he could do defensively, but also even talking to him, his mentality. You forget he's 19 years old.
Wow. That makes me very excited. And it reminds me a little bit of like people told me this same line of thinking about, maximizing value when, oh gosh, now I'm blinking. It was the Robert Hassel draft. It wasn't Robert Hassel, obviously. Was it Wilcox? Something Wilcox. I'm blanking on the
Cole
name
Wilcox.
right
Yeah.
Cole
They went
Wilcox.
over slot, made him one of the highest paid outside of first round guys ever.
Mm-hmm. And I haven't been following him for a while, but then you end up using him in trades outside to get yourself some other players. I believe that he is in the Blake Snell trade,
Yep.
which that's how I think Padres fans should view this. I'm not saying Jackson Merrill is, the savior at what's a position they struggle with? First base somehow, right? Like that he's just going to transition over there, or that he's there when Cronenworth is potentially a free agent and whatnot. It's more just the fact that they have a stock up guy, I think is really, really big because this was supposed to be a trade that absolutely destroys your farm system. And at least they've got some things in there. And it's kind of remarkable considering that there are other teams out there in baseball that I've seen where they didn't make any trade for some superstar, yet the Padres still look like they're in a much better position. Like the White Sox come to mind for me, where it's just like, how much do we have there? What could they do? Maybe a little bit of Red Sox as well. Yeah, man, it's really exciting. What about him? Do you have like a player comp, do you think, for what you're thinking of, or is it too early to say?
It's funny. It's a little bit of being early, but when I look at Merrill and his well-rounded game, I think of Bryson Stott with more upside. If you're hoping for the best case scenario, think Bryson Stott with more explosion. I think Merrill is further along as a defender than Stott was. Of course, Stott was a college guy as well, so it's a little difficult to compare. But in terms of Stott was a great bat to ball guy, and the power continued to develop. Merrill has more upside, but I think you can see across the board above average hit tool. I think he's going to grow into plus power, but above average present power. I think he's going to be an above average defender, above average speed. All of those things kind of combine together here to get a really well-rounded prospect. And I can't emphasize enough, like Merrill is just scraping the surface. I really think, and this is not because I'm on the Padres show and he's the one, quote unquote position player prospect left. Even if they didn't trade all of those guys, I'd be having a conversation with you of where Merrill stacks up with some of these other dudes. I wouldn't be surprised by midseason next year if Jackson Merrill passes Robert Hassel in terms of prospect rankings. We'll have to see how he does at the high A, double A level. Unfortunately, a wrist injury cut him short in low A this year. But even just seeing what he was doing out in the fall league, his swing is so advanced. He's already starting to develop into that power. He told me that he's interested in, strengthening his lower half so he can continue to be more explosive, which is really impressive. And then the glove, I had no idea what to expect. Watched him take, ground balls in practice, then watched him in game. He's going to stick at shortstop. So you have a left-handed bat with potentially plus power and above average tools across the board. I mean, that's going to be a really good player if he continues on the trajectory that he's on, and he's mature beyond his years.
So cool. You're just like, oh, I got to talk to him, got
Yeah.
to watch him take grounders. It's so cool. But yeah, it's especially when, I think that's what's so fun is like, if Jackson Merrill becomes this great player, you're like, well, I talked to him when he was 19.
Yeah.
It's just, it takes a while for baseball, much like everything in the sport, but
that's what makes it cooler.
Really fun. Yeah. There's something really, even I'm starting to appreciate just like, even if it's not on my team, I'm just like, oh crap, yeah, I remember that guy. Like he's coming on. That's really cool. And I also appreciate that you use Bryson Stott as an example because he made some waves in the playoffs, which was really cool. Especially regular season at the end, he did as well. And that's nothing to sneeze at. I know that if you're, a regular fan, you're saying, oh no, like that's not that's not a star, or that's not your next Trey Turner or whatever, like CJ Abrams is getting comps to. But for me, I just look at that and I get really excited and I say, hey man, I also
And
appreciate.
I did say more upside. I'd say
Yeah, you
higher
did say more
ceiling,
upside.
higher
That's true. That's
ceiling.
true. But I appreciate always when people do player comps. I put you on the spot there a little bit, so apologies for that. But it was like I love when you're watching like these draft shows, and then they're just like, yeah, like he shoots well, Steph Curry. You know,
No,
like I
left-handed.
love that.
He's a left-handed basketball player. He's Manu Ginobili.
Yeah, like right. And Europe player. He also likes to play off the bench. Ginobili. And
Yeah.
for football, it's like throws really deep. Mahomes.
Yep.
I
Yeah.
love seeing
I
it.
try to avoid the sweeping generalizations, but
Mhm.
it's definitely one of those things too where sometimes the guys are unique, and I think Merrill at this stage it is a little hard to compare him because he's still molding. I think he's still molding exactly what his game's going to be, and I wouldn't be surprised if he taps into plus power. Then we're looking at a bit of a different profile, left-handed hitting shortstop with plus power. I mean, that's a whole nother story. One other guy I wanted to shout out real quick from my time in the fall league was Tirso Ornelas, another prospect that
Mhm.
under the radar, but has just continued to blossom. And he hits the crap out of the ball. Like, he's got big power. He's just trying to figure out how to consistently tap into it. You look at the power output, and you'd be surprised because he's only hit around 7-8 home runs each season. But when you look at the exit velos, they're way up there. So that's something that I'm waiting to see Ornelas lift the ball more consistently, get better at that. 50% ground ball rate's not great, but the bat to ball skills have continued to get better. His contact rates are phenomenal. Now, just tapping into that power by lifting the ball a bit more frequently, he could be in really good shape. I think this is an above average big leaguer if he continues on his track. Reach AAA as a 22-year-old. It's a question of how much power he taps into, but I think he's got a chance to tap into a good amount of power. Ornelas is somebody that I think should be considered as a top 5 or 6 prospect in this Padres system, even though he's not by most publications.
And I feel like I've heard this name before too. I feel like you might have talked to me about this one like a
I think I have
while
mentioned him
ago.
to you.
I think you have before, along with Uribel Angeles was another one that I
Who
remember
got
too.
traded?
Yeah, who
Yes.
got traded. Yeah, like that's how far back this was and how much things can change. But now, before we kind of close this out, because for old time's sake, I mean, we got to talk about Luis Campusano really quickly because he is. It's so like time really is a flat circle. And the reason I say that is one, because Campusano's prospects seemingly haven't changed whatsoever, despite the many years I've known you and that you've talked about him. And also because the Padres just got out of fairly recently a catcher's, competition. They say that for quarterback all the time, quarterback controversy, carousel, whatever you want to call it, like what's going on with the Patriots right now, right? But with the Padres, it was Austin Hedges or Francisco Mejia. And now it's okay. We got rid of Hedges. We got rid of Mejia, sent him to Tampa Bay. We sent Hedges to Cleveland and all this stuff. And now, yet again, seemingly, the Padres have another issue, and that is the issue of Luis Campusano. And what I mean by issue is, he just doesn't get a lot of at bats, and it's always been odd to me. Give me your quick take on how the Padres have handled him. You've talked ad nauseum about what you think his upside is as a player, but just from afar, even as a Marlins guy, like do you know what's going on exactly?
Yeah, man. Honestly, like it's tough because I can't speak to what goes on behind the scenes,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know what issues there might be there. Because when you look at what he's done offensively, I know he's in a hitter-friendly league in
Mm-hmm.
AAA, but even with that, I love that the last 2 seasons in AAA, if you combine his last 2 years in AAA, it's 81 games in 81 games. So you get a perfect 162. And across that 162, he's hit 29 home runs. He's driven in 105. He's slashed 296, 364, 511 with a 19% strikeout rate. So we're talking about a incredible stat line here in a 162 game sample. It's perfect. He doesn't strike out much. I don't really think there's many questions with the bat. The only issue with the bat is that we haven't seen him get consistent at bats at the big league level, right? 50 plate appearances last year in the bigs, 38 the year before that. If he gets consistent plate appearances, I think the bat's going to continue to develop, and he's going to be an above average big league bat with good power and a good feel to hit. he was
Mhm.
experimenting and tinkering a little bit with his loading mechanism, quieted things down. And I think that was helping him see the ball a bit better at the highest level. If he gets consistent at bats, I really do think he's going to be a good hitter. I don't know what the deal is with the glove. I think tools wise, he's got a chance to be at least an average catcher, but there seems to
Mhm.
be issues with how he's calling games. Pitchers don't seem to love working with him all the time. I know there's been questions about his effort consistently behind the dish. And of course, that's not going to fly with veteran
Mhm.
pitchers. So
Mhm.
that's the big challenge here is he going to give you what you need behind the dish? The bat, I think he could be an above average bat at the big league level next year and continue
Mhm.
to grow off of that. But what are you getting behind the dish? And that's something that could be fluid, though. He's got the tools. If they work with him, he could blossom. He just turned 24 years old.
Yeah.
I'd like to just see him consistently get a chance. But again, I can't speak to what happens behind the scenes.
Yeah, that's a big thing, and that's my best guess. The only other guess that I'm gonna posit to you, a baseball idiot myself, let me ask someone who's smart about this. My only thing that I could come up with is kind of on top of what you just said already about calling games and stuff. And my thing was maybe the Padres, their perspective is Austin Nola worked out all offseason with Yu Darvish and Blake Snell, and they're just used to him. And considering that the pitchers are the strength of this Padres team, they figured that halfway, with only like a month or so left, doesn't really make sense. Maybe we don't want to throw that off. That's my
Yeah.
best
Look at
guess
the
as like,
Astros. Look at the
mhm,
Astros, right? I mean, they rolled with Martin Maldonado and it worked. And if you look at the Padres, I mean, they're a very, very good offensive team. You can give up a little bit on the catches.
mhm,
I know they weren't the offensive team they should have been, but
yeah,
on paper, it's a very talented offense that should have been able to produce
mhm,
regardless. And I think you look at that situation. I think that played a big factor into it. What's interesting is Campusano limited the running game really well at
mhm,
the minor league level, which makes it even more confusing. He threw out 36% of attempted base stealers last year, which is a really solid clip. So I know right now he's I believe playing in the Dominican Winter League, getting more reps behind the dish. I assume they're watching, and seeing
yeah,
how he's working down there and continuing to grind. And I think it's a big sign to see that because Campusano just played a full season plus a handful more games at the big league level. And he's out there in the Dominican Winter League trying to get more reps and trying to get more action behind the dish. And he's swung it well through 6 games there already in a place where it's really hard to hit. It's not a hitter friendly environment. And he's already putting up good numbers through his first 6 games. So I'm still I'm going to give it one more year. I'm going to die on this hill. I'm going to say Campusano is going to mature enough behind the dish to be an everyday catcher. And I just hope the Padres give him the chance to do so.
yeah, absolutely. And I think that fundamentally, 0.2 F4 from Austin Nola. If we want to do the cliff notes of this, I have a hard time believing that you shouldn't at least try out your prospect catcher, especially in a farm system that doesn't have much as it used to. I have a hard time understanding how you wouldn't at least try it.
It's also
And
interesting that he
mhm,
didn't get dealt, right? I mean, I know
yeah,
other teams would
hmm
have interest in him. I
yeah,
mean, I can tell, I can promise you that a big league
yeah,
ready catching prospect, even with the question marks, even if there is, some other concerns that have been made public, let's say, which weren't, but like, even if there were some rumblings, oh, he doesn't work well with pitchers, this or
hmm
that, whatever we could speculate, a team's still taking a shot. And you
uh-huh,
look at some of the trades that they made, he wasn't one of the guys that went. He could have very easily went in that Josh Hader deal, but he didn't.
hmm
So, I don't know if it was the Brewers not wanting him. That's one side of it, but I just think it's interesting
yeah,
that he's one of the guys that's outlasted
hmm
all of these deals,
yeah.
yet
He's
hasn't
the
gotten a
one.
fair shot. He's like in the purgatory right now.
Yeah, he's stuck. He's the only one they won't trade, but then they won't play him either.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, and I think that just as a Padres person, I do fear the veteran pitchers and whatnot saying that they don't like catching for a person. I want to see if like after an off season, right? They didn't want to do it middle season. I get it, but now off season, have him work out with Snell, have him work out with Darvish and Musgrove, who reportedly was also like behind the scenes saying like let's figure this out and whatnot, which is great. Love to hear that from Musgrove. And my thing is, I don't want this to go because I remember once upon a time, guys were saying I don't like catching for this guy. It's this young prospect for the Padres, young guy, and it's like oh they end up trading him. And who was that prospect? I believe it was Yasmani Grandal, who turned out to be pretty solid. So that is the PTSD that I have. And I do not want it to come true that the Padres trade this guy because veteran pitchers don't want to work with him and vice versa. And then all of a sudden he becomes the Sean Murphy Jr., or
Yeah.
something like that, right? Like that would be really, really scary
And
if you're a Padres fan.
And the last thing I'll say is you make a really important note, right? Instead of let's figure it out on the fly while we try to squeeze into the playoffs, let's work together through the offseason. Let's work in spring training. Let's get comfortable. Even through the first couple months of the season, much lower stakes. It's a marathon. Let's work through things together and get to where we need to go. I think it's a lot less pressure. And you'll get more patience, I think, from these veteran arms as well. Because, if it's an investment to the full season, they'll work with these guys. They'll work with a youngster. But if you're trying to make the playoffs down the stretch, your patience is a little thinner in regards to working with a prospect rookie catcher.
Absolutely. That is well said, sir. And as always, it's always well said from you. And it's always fun talking on this podcast about prospect stuff, something that I quite frankly did not care about whatsoever many years ago. By many years, I mean 3. Feels like many, though, because we're in purgatory ourselves these days, to be honest with you. But of course, man, loved having you on. Do you have any last things you would like to plug for the good folks?
Just keep up at justbaseball.com. We just put out our top 20 free agents today with predictions. We've got player profiles on every single free agent, offseason outlooks for every team, which you wrote the Padres offseason outlook. So encourage people to check that out. Did a great job on that. And, we really want to lead the charge on the coverage of the offseason, even the Rule 5 draft. I'm going to be tackling that as well. So we want to be your home for offseason coverage at justbaseball.com. Check out the Just Baseball show as well. And if you like the prospect analysis, and my prospect podcast, The Call Up, that I am always doing as well. We just did that interview that you can check out with Jackson Merrill a couple episodes ago. So go check that out and you can listen to that.
Absolutely. In terms of myself, I will be writing for Just Baseball soon. My favorite moments of the playoffs. That's coming up soon. Going to talk about that on this show as well. But you can catch it written first in my interesting writing style over at justbaseball.com. Also going to be doing an episode on Manny Machado. Probably Thursday, because he was nominated for MVP, and I think that we need to discuss that and discuss the frauds that don't want to vote for him. That I believe is worthy of discussion, and many other things I can confirm are happening at Just Baseball that we can't talk about and whatnot. But it's very exciting. The off season, whether it's Locked On Padres or Just Baseball, it doesn't stop. I mean, it gets slightly lighter, obviously, but it doesn't stop, my friends. So, without further ado, everybody, that about does it for today's edition of the Locked On Padres podcast, the only pod that may be better than the Padres themselves. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. Follow me on Twitter at Javapeno, JAVIIPENO, and Aram on Twitter at Aram Leighton 8. You can go check him out there for all your baseball stuff, man. Pretty good. I thought you were going to say something there. But guys, thanks so much for tuning in. Until next time, stay safe. And of course, stay faithful, my Friar faithful homies. Take care.